And then the fighter forces. The Air Force is planning a cut of almost 1/3 in the A-10 force, with that cut weighted heavily toward the Air National Guard. I have serious doubts and many questions about the wisdom of doing that and the disproportionate impact of these proposed cuts on the Air National Guard. The Air Force is planning to increase the size of active duty A-10 training squadrons at a time when the overall force will be shrinking by almost 1/3. That makes no sense to me. The Air Force asserts that the cut to the A-10 force falls more heavily on the Air National Guard forces because the Air Force will need to keep more of the force in the active component because of forward deployments and dwell time considerations. However, as general-purpose ground forces are withdrawn from Afghanistan, there will be less and less demand for forward deploying A-10 forces to provide close air support. And the Guard has shown their extreme capability and ability to deploy A-10 forces to provide that close air support, including in Afghanistan. In airlift, we have similar questions. The Air Force budget would reduce strategic airlift forces with no apparent plan for how such forces could be reconstituted if needed in the future. Now look at the C-27s. The Air Force had established a requirement validated by the Joint Requirements Oversight Council for 38 C-27 aircraft to provide direct support to Army ground forces. And again, all of those aircraft were going to the Guard. Nobody forced the Air Force to join with what was a joint program with the Army and then take sole ownership of it. Excuse me, no one forced the Air Force to testify that they needed to pursue the C-27 because the C-130s could not meet requirements. When the committee questioned why the Air Force couldn't rely on the C-130 fleet and instead had to start the C-27 program, now the Air Force says that the C-130 is perfectly fine for meeting the direct support mission. The Air Force is proposing some major force structure reductions. And the Air Force chose to apply these reductions more heavily to the Air National Guard. The Air Force plan would cut the end strength for active duty forces by 1.2%, while the Air National Guard would be cut 4 times as much, 4.8%, 4 times as much percentage-wise. Now, I've got some real problems with these proposed force reductions. For instance, the Air Force asserts that the cut to the A-10 force falls more heavily on the Air National Guard forces because the Air Force will need to keep more of the force in the active component due to forward deployments and dwell time considerations. Well, here's the problem with that. First, the Guard's A-10s have more than shown their ability to support wartime operations, including in Afghanistan. Secondly, at the same time that you propose these major cuts in the overall force and in the Guard particularly, you're going to be increasing the number of A-10 aircraft in active duty training squadrons, and you also have some new defense strategic guidance. And despite that guidance, the Air Force is reducing its forward-stationed fighter presence in Europe by only 1 squadron, and that would leave 5 to 6 fighter squadrons in Europe. 5 of these are F-15s and F-16s. Now, the Council of Governors has made a proposal to you to restore some end strength and force structure to the Guard. And my first question is to whether or not the view of the governors are taking into account, and are you considering those views as you made these deliberations and as you continue presumably to deliberate? And I guess the specific question is if you have discussed this matter with the governors, are you still in discussions with the governors? First question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are.
And are you willing to reconsider your proposed reductions in the Guard and the structure of the Guard if those discussions lead to that result?
Well, I need to defer to the Secretary of Defense, who offered this opportunity to the Council of Governors about, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks ago now. We have met with the Council of Governors or their representatives several times in the last couple of weeks. I would say those discussions are ongoing at this point. But we have not yet had an opportunity to brief the DoD leadership on the status of our work. We expect to do that later this week.
Okay, so those discussions are ongoing?
Yes, sir.
And are you willing to reconsider the proposed reductions after the conclusion of those discussions? Is it possible, in other words, that those discussions will lead to some changes in your proposal?
It's possible, sir. This is a decision for the Secretary of Defense, again, who opened up this opportunity to the Council of Governors. He'll have to assess the progress and the value of whatever proposition is laid before him.
And will you get back to us prior to markup on the defense bill, which is about a month and a half, on this matter?
We will.